You ever watch a whole neighborhood cheer for its own destruction and think, well, ain't that just America? That's how it started for me. They said I was just a cranky old man clinging to a pile of rocks. But when you've lived long enough, lost enough, you start to recognize the sound of trouble long before it cracks open under your boots. I warned them, I did, about what happens when you drop dynamite next to fractured granite. But they laughed, all of them, right up until the ground split wide open beneath their million-dollar homes and the HOA cocktail party turned into a disaster movie, live and unscripted. You know what I mean? See, this isn't just a story about an explosion. This is about arrogance, about unchecked power, and about what happens when the earth itself finally says, enough. There's a kind of silence you only get up on a high ridge, my house sitting right at the top, sloped down to the tree line, the kind of place you fight your whole life to afford and never quite believe you deserve. Carol and I, my late wife, we bought this old place 12 years back, after I retired from the Army Corps of Engineers. Modest house, wraparound porch, wind-twisted pines at the back. But peace like that, that's worth every scar you bring home. We fix it up together. She painted every shingle herself, and I rebuilt the old stone wall until my hands bled. When she died, I kept up the place out of habit, and because her laughter still lived there, somewhere in the wind chimes. So when those first neon orange survey flags started showing up across my lower slope, I knew in my gut this wasn't some county mistake. This was trouble with a clipboard. Sure enough, 2 days later, a whole parade of white SUVs showed up. Summit Heights, HOA stenciled right on the side like they already owned the mountain. A guy with a clipboard and too much cologne waved at me, asking if I was the property owner. Yeah, I said, and you're standing on granite, not playground mulch. He told me they were surveying for a new access road. Said the easement barely skirted my property line. Standard procedure, he claimed. Safe, efficient, fully permitted. We'll be using controlled blasting. Like that was supposed to make me feel better. Let me back up a sec. If you don't know rocks, you don't know how dangerous controlled blasting on a fractured ridge really is. I do. So, next morning I stomped down to the HOA office, a glass box pretending to be important, and demanded answers. Met Karen Atwell, Queen Bee president herself, sunglasses in her hair, red blazer, the whole works. She smiled like a realtor before hurricane season, but it didn't reach her eyes. We've had experts on this, Mr. Easton. You're welcome to file an objection, right? I'd seen that look before. Officers making decisions from air-conditioned trailers while other people paid the price. I walked that ridge all afternoon, tracing the paths Carol and I had worn in the dirt, thinking about everything we'd built there. Now I couldn't see anything but a big red X stamped across it by people who never once looked up and saw the sky from this angle. They brought in drilling rigs a week later, tore out trees Carol and I had planted together, and a young tech in a Summit Heights vest gave me a sarcastic thumbs up, like ripping out someone's heart was just part of the job. I started documenting everything: drone footage, thermal scans, seismic readings. I knew from experience that when they finally lit the fuse, they wouldn't just wake the ridge. They'd wake something a whole lot older and meaner. They didn't even try to hide it. The morning of the blast, the HOA turned the whole thing into a block party. Cupcakes, folding tables, hard hats on toothpicks. Karen strutted in like she was running for governor, flanked by realtors and a drone crew. I watched from my porch, hands gripping the rail until it groaned. They handed her a remote detonator, and she made a little speech about progress and the future, skipping over the fact they'd skipped every environmental impact study, every real risk assessment, just so they could cut 4 minutes off a drive to Whole Foods. The countdown hit 0, and boom. Not a Hollywood explosion. More like a series of sickening thuds, deep and ugly, followed by a roar that rolled through the pines and a geyser of dust 30 feet high. The crowd cheered, but I felt something else, a groan, low and ancient, deep underfoot. Not the surface pop of broken rock, but something waking up. I checked the soil with my seismic probe, and sure enough, I caught a ripple. Not a normal afterblast tremor, but a delayed wave heading northeast, straight under the houses. I called my old friend Leaf Danner, a structural geologist who saved my hide more than once. You're telling me an HOA just blasted the base of a fault shelf? He said. Don't go poking around alone tonight. You might have unlocked something you can't put back. That night, Karen sent out a triumph email, selfie attached, grinning with the detonator. She quoted a Dr. Weissman, supposed geologist. Turns out the guy was a podiatrist from Ohio. She counted on nobody double-checking. I printed out everything, filed a complaint with the county, knowing it would disappear into bureaucracy. But I wasn't just some retiree with time to kill. I'd mapped fracture zones and war zones. I knew what was coming. Next morning, the whole ridge was dusted and gray. The porch rail felt like the aftermath of a funeral. I walked the upper slope, found a shallow depression that hadn't been there, a hair-thin crack snaking across the roots of the old manzanitas. The kind of quiet warning you learn to fear. By afternoon, I'd assembled a binder of evidence, maps, drone footage, pressure readings, and marched it down to the HOA office. Karen's assistant looked at me like I'd brought a bomb. Their response was a glossy community update blasting out to everyone, painting me as a doomsday prepper. Most folks didn't care. Cupcakes had been free, and nobody wants to believe the ground can betray them. Only one neighbor reached out. Mara Jameson, nurse for houses down. Michael, my garage floor's sloping, and the kids swear the dresser rattled last night. Tell me I'm imagining this. She wasn't. Cracks appeared, slow at first. Garage floors slumping, sidewalks lifting, sprinkler heads popping off. The ground started to move, not like an earthquake, but like an animal turning in its sleep. Karen hosted a wine mixer right above the blast zone, jazz trio playing while the soil shifted beneath their feet. I showed up in my old Class A jacket, metals polished, not to intimidate, but to remind them this wasn't over. You really think you know more than the pros I hired? She hissed. I know what happens when you set charges on metamorphic sediment, I replied. For a heartbeat, I saw doubt flicker in her eyes. But pride's a stubborn thing. The morning it all went sideways started beautiful, postcard blue sky, not a bird in sight. Then the ground snapped, a brittle crawl up through the granite, and the ridge lurched. Sidewalks heaved, driveways collapsed, water mains ruptured, and a canyon tore open where the blast trench had been, steam hissing out of the new fault. I shoved my GPR probe in the crack, displacement 2 feet deep and growing, heading right under the homes. Within an hour, Mara's sidewalk was buckling, and neighbors poured out in pajamas, wide-eyed. Karen stood in her driveway, barefoot in silk pajamas, staring at the gaps splitting her front step. You need to evacuate, I said. But they said the rock was stable, she whispered. No licensed geologist ever signed off, I told her. Neighbors started looking at her, then at me. The ground wasn't done, not by a long shot. Aftershocks came, slow and mean, just enough to crack drywall and rattle nerves. The HOA fired off emails blaming routine soil settling. Karen invented another expert, a biology teacher in Tucson who moonlighted selling essential oils. But the ground refused to play along. When a neighbor's sedan got swallowed by a sinkhole, city inspectors arrived, and the whole cover-up began to crumble. I handed over my binder to the county inspectors, maps, drone footage, seismographs. The lead engineer took one look at the data and said, this wasn't settling. This was triggered. Within days, the county shut down the HOA's authority. Karen came to my door, all pretense gone, holding a trembling folder. If you issue a joint statement with me, we could calm things down. I just pointed to the door. Get off my property. That night, the first house got a red tag, unsafe structure. The next day, 2 more. People started packing, crying on their lawns, kids clinging to stuffed animals as movers loaded up their lives. But out of the panic, something changed. The neighbors who once voted to fine me for a too-tall fence showed up with flash drives, email logs, everything the board had tried to bury. We formed the Ridge Preservation Group, got 27 signatures for a recall in one night, and shoved the demand under Karen's door. By noon the next day, the county designated Summit Heights as a geologically compromised zone. Insurance carriers pulled out, and property values plummeted. The news went national. Drone shots of the fault scar, late-night hosts joking about the HOA that broke a mountain. Karen resigned quietly, left at dawn with a moving truck, never looked back. The HOA dissolved within 2 weeks, bankrupt, broken, their power gone like dust on the wind. But we stayed. The neighbors rebuilt, this time together. No more secret votes, no more dictator board. Mara became council chair. I taught the kids how to read a topo map, how to spot a tension crack, how to listen to the earth. They call me the Ridge Whisperer. I don't correct them. One day, I got a package in the mail. No return address, just a photograph of Karen standing alone on a windswept plain, her handwriting on the back. You were right. The ground always wins. I'm sorry. I slipped it into Carol's old gardening journal and let the anger go. Summit Heights isn't perfect, never will be, but the folks who stayed built something stronger than any HOA could enforce. Trust. You know, people always talk about justice like it's something you can legislate. But I'll tell you, real justice is quieter. It's a ridge holding steady after the world tries to break it. A wind chime singing the same song it's sung for years, no matter who's listening. So here's my question. When the ground shifts beneath your feet, do you listen, or do you just keep building and hope no one notices the cracks? Leave a comment, tell me your story, because if you've ever fought for a piece of land, or just for a little peace of mind, you know exactly what I'm talking about.